That's the introduction right there, but definitely what you can see is that it's a unique combination that we have here to speak to this particular topic. AI being used for healthcare diagnostics, neurologist, assistant division head, and informatics, both at CHOC. And I don't want to take away your time. We want most of it here to get started.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Alan. And then let's see, I think I need to get mine up, which should be here. Fantastic. So, is this on or not really? Yep. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I am not an engineer, but I am born of two engineers. My dad was a dean of a university, professor of engineering, and my mom worked at an automotive company, and I grew up in Detroit around lots and lots of cars. My first job was actually at 16, working at one of these automotive industries. I got wrangled in because I was, back in the day, remember before Geek Squad, there was people like me who would go out and hang out at like tech places and basically pick up customers and say, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I'll fix your computer for half the cost and I'll do it at your house. So I fixed a Ford executive's computer, and he's like, you seem like you know what you're doing. Do you want a job in our computer science department? So I did beta testing, and then I did database for all of the crash vehicle safety for all the vehicles in Ford Motors lineup for the whole world, basically. And then I decided I don't want to be an engineer. I want to do something else in my life, and I decided to become a physician. So I wear lots of hats. So like Raman mentioned, I am the assistant division chief at CHOC Children's Hospital. I am the vice president of medical for a startup, which is Palo Alto based, which you'll hear a little bit about, called Cognoa. My academic appointment is at the University of California-Irvine. I sit on the board of directors for the American Academy of Pediatrics. And like Dr. Fahy mentioned, I am part of a movement called AI Med, which is artificial intelligence in medicine. I think we changed our website, but it's ai-med.io. And we actually have a weekly, or not a weekly, a monthly magazine that you can subscribe to digitally to start learning more about this space and how you may be interested in it. If you look at the number of deals that are being made that involve artificial intelligence, you can see in this graph that there is a big push and this constant rise of artificial intelligence in the healthcare space and that technology being adopted. And you may say, wow, healthcare is way ahead of the curve. In reality, we're actually not. We're probably playing catch up to many other types of industries and sectors. And if you break down where that happens to kind of be in the healthcare space, a lot of it is in insights and risk analytics. And so if you think about how do I predict which patients are not going to do well, how do I try and prevent them from not doing well, picking up signs or signals that are maybe not so obvious to clinicians, and we'll talk a little bit about that space. A lot of it is in the lifestyle management and monitoring. So there is a big push in medicine to use wearables and use social media inputs and start obtaining data outside of the traditional healthcare walls to start monitoring patients. And there is a large industry in that as well. We're going to focus primarily on diagnostics with a lot of emphasis on a lot of the imaging that is taking place in diagnostics, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about what Cognoa has been doing in a different space. Drug discovery is extremely exciting. So if you know, I actually worked at pharma before I became a physician as well. One more hat to wear. And I worked at Pfizer, and a lot of the things that we tried to put down the pipeline didn't really work. And at one point, before I decided to go into medicine, they were like, hey, do you want to do cosmeceuticals, which is basically cosmetics for, but not really real pharmaceuticals. And I was like, no, that's okay, I'll be a doctor. It's going to be face creams and all kinds of great things. So, but drug discovery is huge. And I think we have a lot of different targets that work really, really well on a cellular level, work really, really well when you take it to a mouse, a rat, a sheep, a goat, but then you try and get it into a human being and it doesn't work, and it's because systems are complex. And so how do we look at existing targets or existing drugs and repurpose them? And artificial intelligence can do that. There's some companies out there, one of my good friends, Spiro Moses, works for Systems Oncology, and he worked at TGen before, and he's working in that space as well. Emergency rooms, hospital management, again, wearables we talked about. Virtual assistants are big as well, so there has been a big push in terms of how do you scale human beings. We have a physician shortage in many areas. For example, in Orange County, I am one of about a dozen neurologists in the county. We have 750,000 kids in Orange County. If 1% of the population has epilepsy, that's 7,500 kids that we need to figure out how to take care of. That's 7,500 patients with autism. That's many, many kids with headaches. There's just no room. So our current wait list is about 600 to 700 patients. I don't have anywhere I put them, and I can't recruit more neurologists because there's not enough of us in the world. So how do we leverage up? How do we use virtual assistants? How do we make physicians more productive, more efficient? These are all things that we can think about, and we can apply different technologies to actually advance the field. And one of those big technologies is obviously AI. I'm not going to go through all of these. If you think about healthcare, I'll start with undiagnosed. So this is actually a really big problem, and it's something that people don't actually recognize happens. So this is a documentary that was produced, and if you have a rare disease, it takes about 8 years for a physician to figure out what the heck you have. That's really frustrating, and as you know, in many disease states, the longer you wait, the harder it gets. If you have diabetes and you ignore it, and you wait, your diabetes is going to get much harder for me to treat. In the autism space, if I recognize a kid, on average, the recognizing of autism is about 4 years of age. I've missed the developmental window where I can actually intervene, and I can maybe turn around and change that lifelong trajectory for that patient. So that's about 350 million people living with a rare disease, and many will not get diagnosed ever, and 8 years before some of them will ever get diagnosed. So if you ask physicians also, what do you think is the rate of misdiagnosis? So if you survey physicians, some say about 10%, some it's like 10 to 20% is the majority, some say 30%. What is it actually? If you look at the studies, they bear out anywhere between 5%, but even in ICU cohorts, it's about 30% of misdiagnosis. So after patients pass away and we do autopsies, we can find something like a pancreatic adenocarcinoma misdiagnosed over 30% of the time. In ICU patients, 17%, and in outpatient, about 5%. You have 5% error rate, that's not that big of a deal. Guess what? That's about 12 million adults annually misdiagnosed with something. So diagnosis is a problem, and you say, well, physicians must be dumb, right? Well, no, actually, healthcare is really, really complicated, right? Who knew it was going to be so complicated? That's my political point for the night. No. So, right, it's actually really complicated. And so if you think about the diagnostic process, there's actually a lot of things that have to happen. First of all, the patient has to experience a health problem. They have to detect that something is wrong. That's what makes you go to the physician. So is there an opportunity to detect things that the human body cannot detect, right? So this is a point of wearables, sensors, patterns that are not obvious that we can pick up. So engaging the patient before they even know that there is a problem and identifying them before the problem. Then you have to get the patient to engage in the healthcare system. And we'll talk about the issues with that. The physician has to gather, or the healthcare provider has to gather information, could be NP or a PA. They have to integrate that information, and then they have to come up with a working diagnosis. And things that feed into that are physical exam, the history. Sometimes you ask a specialist like myself to weigh in. What do you think it is? Diagnostic testing. Then you have to decide, how do you communicate that to the patient? What treatment are you going to decide? There's a feedback loop of the treatment, right? So if I think you have ADHD and I prescribe you an ADHD medication and you don't get better, then it makes me think, well, maybe the ADHD is not the right diagnosis because I'm treating you and you're not getting better. Maybe it's something else. And then looking at outcomes and how do we take those outcomes and learn from them. But there's lots of points of failure, right? And my mom, one of the things that she did is she would lay out manufacturing plans. And so she was a systems analyst, right? She would look for, how do we make this Mustang faster, better, cheaper, with less errors, right? In medicine, we don't learn that. Nobody taught me in medicine to look at systems and analyze them. It's not until after I became a physician that they start talking about, it'd be probably good if you learned, how to do this and how to identify problems within the healthcare system. And so a lot of this is self-taught in healthcare. It's not part of our curriculum. If you think about along the way, right, like anything, if you do a diagnostic test, for example, there is going to be some sampling error. So there are patients that I think have a problem, I check the lab, it comes back negative. Does that mean that they don't have that condition? No, it means that I didn't catch it in that moment, right? And then you have to figure out in what way can I pick that up? How do I recognize that? When is the optimal time to test for that condition? Sometimes in primary care settings, they don't have specialized equipment. There are time constraints, right? If you go to your pediatrician or your primary care physician, they have about 15 minutes with you in order to keep the lights on. If they spend 30, they have to cut that from somebody else in order to keep the lights on, because healthcare reimbursement's not the greatest it needs to be. And so, right, so where there's rush, there is competing priorities, right? I'm getting paged from the hospital about a patient that's dying, and there's someone in my room, but they don't look that bad. So I have to decide, how do I triage? I mean, we do this all the time in medicine. So lots of points of potential failure in the system. And to compound that and to make it even more problematic, our systems are not the greatest, right? So our EMR systems were designed in a vacuum, maybe. We are forced to do things that are called meaningful use but have maybe little meaning. And the amount of healthcare data that we are generating is enormous. And so yes, there is a big push to start adding wearables and extra data sources, but how do we integrate those data sources in a usable way for the physician or the healthcare team to actually understand, or even as a patient, for you to understand? And so we are looking at 1 million gigabytes of healthcare-related data in their lifetime. So I'll give you an example. This is a patient that I saw the other day. He's 10 years old. He has 2,564 documents that I need to know. He has 242 conditions that have been documented in his medical record. He only has one immunization because there is a lack of interoperability. So although he has immunizations, we've only given him one in our institution. The rest, I have no idea what they are, because they're on a card, on a piece of paper that's not digitized and doesn't communicate with another system, right? He's had 248 procedures in the hospital. He's been prescribed in his lifetime 79 different medications, and he's had 569 visits. This is not an outlier in my practice. This is what we do in specialty visits. I know this patient inside out, and I know him very, very well. But that is not the case for every patient that I see. And it's actually really hard. And I've been taking care of this child for about 6 years or 7 years since I got to California. So I know him well, I know his history well, right? But if someone's covering for me, I'm not there, I'm away at a conference, I'm on vacation, right? Doctors do take vacation, and they have to figure out what's going on with this kid. Super complicated. It's really hard, right? And this is the best system, right? This is helping me understand. These are our visualizations. All right, here's another patient. So this patient, this is a lot of information. This is an inpatient who's acutely sick, right? I mean, looking at that actually makes me a little bit nauseated, right? It's not a really good dashboard. And so thinking about, how do we look at outside venues, outside industries that do this really, really well and go, you know what, this is by the way, this is custom built, right? If you took the stock one from our EMR provider, it's terrible, right? This is us working on it and doing a lot of custom building, right? So it's a data tsunami, right? How do we take this information and start analyzing it and start showing me the stuff that actually is relevant to me, right? Because if a cardiologist is looking at a patient, a cardiologist, they want to see something very, very different than a neurologist. They want to see something very, very different than the primary care physician who's caring for the kid. And so guess what? I have a single view. It doesn't matter what you are, who you are, you see the same thing for every single patient, regardless of what lens you're looking at that patient. We don't do that in other industries, so why is healthcare so backwards and healthcare so dysfunctional? The other thing that I like to talk about is cognitive biases, right? So even though we have all this information for us, physicians and human beings in general, so not just physicians, but clinicians, we actually get stuck on cognitive biases a lot. And this is, you're not meant to read this, it's just to show you that there are lots of cognitive biases. One of my favorite ones is actually anchoring. So I have residents and they anchor on a diagnosis. So this is a lot why misdiagnosis happens. So they fail to recognize new information and adjust their diagnosis, right? So a patient comes in, they have a elevated lab, for example, and you decide, okay, I think that this is, this is rhabdomyolysis, for example, right? But then new information comes in and they fail to update, they fail to recognize that new information and adjust their cognitive thinking. Or they had a recent patient example, right, that makes them think about a really bad diagnosis when in fact it's something very common, and they'll over-test or overdo things. And so we have to be very aware of cognitive biases, and one of the things that we have to be very aware of is when we implement technology, not to implement those cognitive biases into our technologies. So for example, I'll use Ford Motor Company again. So Ford Motor Company, when they train their natural language processing voice commands, they trained it on a bunch of male samples. And so women who tried to use the technology found it very, very frustrating to use the sync, which is actually Sony, but they found it very, very difficult because it was trained on all male samples. Other examples we see are in the criminal justice system, for example. Algorithms that were used were trained on biased samples, and so they had a bias towards incarcerating or recommending punishment for certain ethnic groups more than other ethnic groups. And so we have to be careful about when we train in artificial intelligence that our data set is robust, it's diverse, and it doesn't introduce biases, and you have to be careful when we're doing that in healthcare. So this is, I believe actually this is from IEEE, and this is wrong. It is not doctors versus AI, it is not AI versus doctors, right? And they are trying to pit us against each other. What we really need to be thinking about, and if you like, you can take pictures and QR code it and you'll get the reference. But don't think about it this way, and this is not how physicians want to think about AI. If you come in and you tell me that this AI is going to replace radiologists, the radiologists are going to laugh at you and they're not going to take you seriously. But if you say, hey, you know what, this AI can help you, it can scale you, it can support you, you're going to get much more buy-in. And the reality is that artificial intelligence will not supplant human physicians. These tools will assist healthcare providers to be efficient and accurate. That's a quote from Dr. Lowe. And this is from one of my colleagues, Dr. Chang. Will AI replace physicians? No, but the physicians who use AI will replace the physicians who do not. Right? So that's how we want to be thinking about artificial intelligence. That's how we want to be thinking about how technology helps us. And actually, to be honest with you, as a physician, if I can spend more time actually being a doctor rather than being a data entry, so if you, sometimes I joke and they ask, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a data entry. Right? I enter data into a computer. That's what I do all day, right? I take your information, I type it into the computer. That's not what you want me to do. You want me to be thinking. You want me to be thinking about your problem, and you want me to have all the resources available to me so that if it's something that I don't know, something that I haven't seen before, I have the world of medical intelligence behind me. Right, so when we start talking about our innovation institute, it's not an innovation institute, it's actually a medical intelligence and innovation institute, because our goal is to be smarter, not to be innovative necessarily. It's to do both. So we know that computers can do some pretty cool things, but if you try and figure out if it's a parrot or guacamole or a chihuahua or a muffin, even I have problems with this sometimes. And despite the problems that we can have with trying to characterize things, computers are actually doing pretty cool things in computer vision, right? So I can show a computer an image, right? So I have Google Photos on my phone, and I was trying to find an image of my daughter in spring wearing a certain outfit. I'm like, I know it's there, right? And I could put those keywords. I didn't tag the photo, right? It's auto-tagging the photos as it's generating, right? I can even like find my kid as she grows up, right? It knows like that's my daughter when she was 4, 10, 15, and totally hormonal, right? So you can track over time changes that you wouldn't normally think that the computer could get. And so this is pretty cool. This is actually the computer starting to not only label food, right, because who cares, right, but label medical structures, right? So we can use this in teaching. We can use this in trying to identify pathology. And in fact, the FDA recently cleared arteries, MRI suite. And so they have FDA clearance, and what they've done is they've used an artificial intelligence system to basically learn how to label images, and they label these images by basically drawing circles. Not that hard, actually. This is not like, wow, super high tech, but in medicine, this is, wow, super high tech. And they can actually, from that, reconstruct 3D images and calculate what the volume. So this is actually something that was very tedious, something that was very, had a lot of poor inter-rater reliability, right? So if one clinician did it and then another clinician did it, depending on what angle, what view, when they were trying to measure, they would kind of get it wrong. And so by using technology and by leveraging some machine learning on many, many, many images that we had good endpoint data on, we can start going back and sort of reconstruct or recreate and then say, okay, put the images in, it'll calculate out what the ejection fraction is from the images, and we don't need to do more invasive, because in order to get some of this data, it was more of like put a catheter in your heart, not just take an image, a cardiac MRI, right? So we can minimize the procedures and the risks associated with those procedures by leveraging technology to do computer vision and start calculating and measuring things for us that, guess what, humans don't do very, very well. The other thing that we can do is look at how do we take medical imaging and detect things that are actually really, really hard to detect. So I don't know if you've ever been into a radiologist reading room. You think radiology, so we have a system, right? So we call it like the ABCs of you're reading a chest x-rays, right? So first I look at the airway, then I look at the bones, and then I look at the lungs, and then I look for the heart and the opacifications, right? So we try and do this very systematic way of reading chest x-rays, right, that we learn in medical school and as residents. But the reality is that sometimes it's actually really hard, and if there's a retrocardiac shadow, right, that means there's something behind the heart, sometimes it's actually really hard to see. And it's to the point that maybe if you use computers to actually use computer vision, you can pick it up. So this is a case where they took 15 radiologists, they showed this to the radiologist, and they said, hey, what do you think? And 8 out of the 15 were like, normal, nothing. Right? You got to remember now, that's in a best case scenario. In real life, they're reading x-rays, boom, 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 right? You're going to miss, right? There was actually studies where they put a picture of an elephant in the radiology film, and the radiologist like totally ignored it, right? It's a cognitive dissonance, right? It's like, well, that's not supposed to be there, and they just like, whatever, next, right? But hey, you know what? If you're the person with the lung cancer, that sucks. That's really bad, right? So how do we use technology to maybe highlight things and go, hey, doctor, what do you think about that blue-green highlight there? Doesn't that look weird? Look at that. Draw your attention to it, right? So when I'm driving in my Tesla and I'm not paying attention, it's like, hey, you should probably watch the road. You're going to kill yourself. You're going to stop doing that. Here's another one. So this is, again, 11 out of 15 neurologists, or radiologists, excuse me, actually missed this one. And it's not super obvious, right? I'm looking at that chest x-ray and I'm like, oh, actually now, well, yeah. I'm going to move, so I don't know if you'll catch me. But, like, not obvious. Oh, but look, it's highlighted. Oh, yeah, you know what? Actually, there is something that's kind of outlined over here, and it's weird, and it's not supposed to be there, right? So if it draws your attention, then you can start, maybe you don't see it, you're just like, whatever. But trust me, it's there. But if you can highlight and you can draw attention to it, that is actually very helpful to us. And so this is what I was talking about. It's not AI versus physician. So if you actually look, human versus human plus algorithm always beats algorithm or human alone, generally speaking, right? So it's the marriage of technology and human beings. We're not going to go through that. Another one that's actually really cool, so this is from the University of Michigan. This is, again, looking at like mammography, for example. So mammography is actually really, really hard because there's a lot of variability. It's not a homogeneous structure. Even from patient to patient's mammography, there is a lot of variability. It's obscured. You know, mammography is actually a really bad test, but we do it to screen for breast cancer. And so the question is how do you figure out what to do? And so there's this dream challenge where they are trying to get patients to upload their mammography, and those who with cancer, those without, and try and figure out how do we read this better so that we don't subject lots and lots of people to invasive biopsies, that may actually come back positive with a cancer, and then you're kind of like, well, what do I do? Do I do a mastectomy? Am I over-reading this, right? So sometimes when we actually implement technology, we actually make a bigger problem, right? Because we're detecting things that maybe are not clinically significant, right? So what we've done is we've said, oh, everybody needs a mammogram, right? And then maybe we're starting to find breast cancers that are not clinically significant, they're never gonna hurt the patient, and maybe we should just leave them alone and not touch them. And so we're trying to figure out how do we actually, again, use technology to make it so that when we do these tests and we get a result, we know if that's a clinically significant result or not. Because what happens is we just see stuff and we go, oh, scary, do more, do more, do more, and then you get into trouble. This is another cool one. This is Phenomx. I don't have any relationship with any of these companies, by the way. I'll tell you when I do. This one's actually really cool. This one actually measures hippocampal volume, so it does a quantitative analysis on hippocampal volume. And the hippocampus, if you remember, was involved in memory. And so if you have Alzheimer's dementia, your memory is a little bit off. And so we can actually start measuring and using this for quantitative analysis. Similarly, you can do it for segmentation and labeling of the spinal cord, so things that affect the spinal cord. We actually have a lot of viruses that are polio-like, enteroviruses, for example, things like Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS. All of these things affect the spinal cord, neuromalus optica. So how do you segment out the spinal cord? How do you measure it? How do you predict that something is happening? MS, for example, is another good one. So using basically computer vision to evaluate and help the physician and empower the physician so that they can scale up. This one's actually really cool too. This is out of UCSF. This is John Shepard's work. He was actually taking DEXA scans, or these are scans that look at body mass composition to figure out how much skeletal muscle, how much fat, how much bone. And he actually did a predictive analytics on it that from a less radiation, less scan, I can actually predict, and you can see the difference in the middle is almost negligible, that you can actually predict what the body mass is going to be and what's involved. And actually he took it even a step further, that just from a silhouette of the patient or silhouette of the person, you can calculate body mass from that. So there's a lot of opportunities to say, hey, if we take a large set of data, and by the way, in healthcare, a large set of data is like 1,000 patients, not like hundreds of millions of shoes on eBay. And actually, you think 1,000 patients is easy to get, it's actually really hard to get. Healthcare is a very complicated field. There's a lot of silos in healthcare, and we're trying to figure out how to break those down. But if you can get data sets, there's actually a lot of really cool things that you can do, and you can answer some really neat questions, and you can create products and get IP and go visit James and, James, right? John, I was close, John. Here's another cool one. So this is pathologists. So just like radiologists, pathologists look at cells under the microscope and they go, is that cancer or is it not? And so the ground truth is circling, and then you can see that there was an algorithm, so it was a competition. I think this was actually a Kaggle competition to say, can we detect atypical cells? Can you find the cancer in the pathology? Because guess what, when I'm a pathologist, I don't know how they do this all day. They literally look at the microscope and they like scan, right? And then, you get tired. Your eyes get tired, right? So can the computer go, hey, Dr. Taraman, this looks really weird. Check it out. Don't worry about the rest of this, right? And then can I do the pathology much faster? Or can I make sure that I don't miss things that are problematic? Did you get the picture? Good. Okay. This is super cool. So this is out of Google. Jack Poe, who works over there, is a good friend of mine. They actually were able to take a bunch of retinal pictures and predict diabetic retinopathy. This is like the real deal first, Google, I'm gonna come out with AI and publish in a medical journal, and this was like kind of a little bit of a hallmark. We're gonna look back and go, that was really cool. But not only was it cool that their ROC curve was right on with like really, really smart retinal specialists, it's actually really cool that they were able to predict with a very high accuracy whether or not that retina belonged to a male or female. Because guess what? I can't look at that retina and go, that's a boy and that's a girl. Nobody can do that. But there's something in your retina that predicts your gender. We just don't know what it is. And it's actually very fascinating. So there are things that machine learning and AI can detect that are beyond what we know exists for humans, and it may give us insights into disease or into pathology that we never even imagined, right? So part of this is actually not only maybe helping physicians to get more time to imagine, but helping that imagination process. Because guess what? If I have 20% of my time I can devote to think about new ideas, I'm going to make way more of an impact in healthcare than if I saw patients during that 20% of time and I'm running around with my chicken with my head cut off type of thing, right? So we need a little bit of downtime to be creative, right? If you look at really creative organizations, they give their employees, they give their staff time to play a little bit, which is why I went into pediatrics and not adult medicine, because I get to play sometimes. A lot, actually, I play, more than probably people want me to. But it also helps me generate really, really good ideas, because sometimes getting silly is actually really important. This is another cool one. This is a live core, so getting out of computer vision. So a live core is an EKG, right? It's electrical activity. Can we take 12 leads, roll it down to 1, and can we start detecting arrhythmias, right? So arrhythmias is when your heart beats abnormally. It's not supposed to beat that way. So atrial flutter, atrial fibrillation, things that put you at risk for stroke, heart attacks, etc. Can you start detecting them and do it outside of the hospital? And so a live core is another one, FDA approved, actually FDA cleared, because approval means something else. We approve drugs, we clear devices. So this is an FDA cleared device, and this is fantastic, right? What other opportunities are there? Can we do this with EEGs? Can we do this with other signals from the body and start detecting and monitoring people remotely so that I can pick you up before you get into trouble and end up in the emergency department and need, cardiac catheterization? Okay, so cool, whatever, right? This is my teenage daughter, right? This is Bitmoji. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that technology. That's me. Okay, so yeah, right, lots of cool stuff, whatever, Dr. Taraman. Well, okay, so the thing that you have to figure out is, yes, a lot of times tech companies come, they visit me or other physicians, they show us cool stuff, and then we're like, yeah, so what? I'm not gonna do anything with that. So when you're doing this, if you wanna get in this space, you need to ask the right questions. You need to figure out what are the problems that we actually need solved. And if you think you know what the problem is, you don't. Go ask patients, go ask clinicians, go do your homework, right? You have to really understand the question before you start trying to solve what the problem is. Don't just guess. Definitely look for unmet needs. There are a lot of unmet needs in medicine, but the next new cool device maybe is not an unmet need for me, right? Take a problem that I have and fix it, right? That's what you're supposed to do. You're an engineer, right? Take a problem, fix it. Right? That's what my parents told me. Okay, verify good questions with lots of stakeholders, and then make sure that your clinicians, your data scientists, your engineers, they need to interact, right? So at CHOC, we have data scientists that come and hang out with us and go on rounds, and sometimes they get a little bit lightheaded because it's bloody and gory, not really. But but they need to see how we work in a real setting so they can go, okay, I understand now. This is how you think. This is how you make decisions. This is where information is helpful. This is how you view information. This is how you process information, right? If you understand the problem, then you can actually start working on the solution. Okay, so what if there are no diagnostic tests? How much time do I have? I'm not boring you guys, am I? Okay, good. Okay, so what if there are no diagnostic tests? This is my problem. So I came to Orange County, and one of the things that was part of my original agreement when I joined is for the first 3 years, I needed to see kids who are under the age of 5 and try and diagnose them with autism. Because we have an autism problem in Orange County, we don't have enough resources, the kids don't get the diagnosis on time, so the average age is late, and it's because we don't really have good tests to enable physicians to do it. So what if there are no diagnostic tests? So this is the state of affairs in Orange County. This is a company I do work for, so this is my disclaimer that I work with this company, but I want to tell you what we do. So if you have a concern about a child, most time the parents recognize that around 18 months of age. They typically go to their primary care physicians, and sometimes they have to wait because it's not time for your child visit, right? So you might not have another visit for 6 months or 12 months. And then when you go in and you see your pediatrician or your primary care physician or your family practice doc who maybe is not super comfortable with the diagnosis, they may say, you know what, why don't we wait and see what happens with your child's development? And so you may wait another 6 to 12 months waiting, hoping that it's going to get better. And the reason why is that primary physicians don't really have a tool to diagnose. and they're not really trained in developmental disorders very well. And so finally, at some point, they decide, you know what? This child may be on the autism spectrum. This child may have a developmental delay. Why don't you go see a specialist? And guess what? There's not a lot of me, so you go wait in another line. And some of those patients that wait in line get to the front of the line, and then I go, you know, you've been waiting in the wrong line. I'm sorry, go wait in that line now for another 6 to 12 months. And on average, it's about 12 months to see a specialist. And guess what? We have a lot of variability. So if you see a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a developmental pediatrician, we all do different things. And so you might see multiple different specialists before you actually get a diagnosis. And so our average age of diagnosis, as I mentioned, is over 4 years of age, and that's a problem. If you get to a specialist, many of them will use something called an ADOS. It is a research tool. It is a good research tool, but it's never meant to be in a primary care setting. It takes about 60 to 90 minutes to administer, and I just told you you have 15 minutes with your primary care physician. They don't have 90 minutes to spend with the patient to diagnose them with autism. It's actually a pretty crude scoring method, so it's like, does my boyfriend love me Cosmo quiz or Teen Vogue or whatever, right? I have to score it up, and if I get more than 10, does my boyfriend loves me? So that's not really helpful, right? Because it doesn't take into consideration complex interactions between the questions that are being asked. And then the last thing is it actually requires specialized training to do it. So we've kind of done a disservice to these, we actually done a big disservice to these patients. And so from the initial concern to when you get a diagnosis, guess what you've missed? You've missed the window of opportunity. So your brain undergoes a process called neuroplasticity. It is highest between the ages of about 2 and 4 years of age, where there is a lot of neuronal connections that are being formed and pruned, and the stuff that you do a lot of gets solidified, and the stuff that you don't do very well gets pruned away. So for example, if you have a neurologic condition, like epilepsy for example, and I let you have lots and lots of seizures, guess what? You're going to get really good at having seizures, and then it's really hard for me to fix that. If you do math and you do lots and lots of math, guess what? You're going to get good at math. And even if I don't let you do any math problems for 2 years, you'll still remember how to do math. It's like riding a bike. So what we want to do is we want to basically move all of this earlier, pick up the kids earlier, fix the problem earlier. And the reality is that I recognize, given my background, that this is not a people solution. This is a technology solution, right? So I can train more neurologists, but I can only do that so fast. Why can't we leverage technology? And so that's why I joined this company, among other reasons. And so what the company does is we have figured out initially from about 20,000 patients, so that's big data in healthcare. We took their line item responses from ADOS and ADIR, which are those tools I was telling you about, and Dr. Wall, who's now at Stanford, previously at Harvard. So Dennis took that data and he was able to pare down and figure out, you know, here's a handful of questions that are maximally predictive of the diagnosis. Can we just ask those and skip this whole waiting period? Just ask the parents, do you have these things with your child? Does your child exhibit that? And so we're getting data directly from the patients. Guess what? That's what I do as a physician. You come in my office, you have a headache, tell me about your headache. Where is it? When does it happen? What does it feel like? Do you vomit with your headaches? Right? The other thing that we do is we extract video from data, or data from video. I use this example a lot. I had a patient come into my office. He was extremely afraid of me because the ENT put tubes in his ear, and he thought I was going to do the same thing, which I don't do in my office, and he was acting very autistic. And I was kind of, talking to the parents. I'm kind of concerned. Tell me about your child. I started asking screening questions. He said, no. He's just freaked out because he's in a doctor's office. He doesn't normally act like this. And I said, well, do you have any videos of your child playing at home? Let me see them. And they were able to pull up some videos on their iPhone, so we love technology, and I was able to see the child interacting completely normally with his siblings and his parents. And then I was like, well, okay, yeah, he's acting weird in the office, but it's because he's freaked out. He thinks I'm going to put tubes in his ears. The other thing that we've been working on too, so those are the current two. We've been working on an interactive story time. So there's actually a lot of signals in the voice of patients. So it's not necessarily what they say, but how they talk. So you can actually pick up voice signals. This is actually true for other conditions like Parkinsonianism, for example. There are voice changes that happen, dementia, maybe there are signals there. And then how the child interacts with the tablet. So we're looking at how do we turn on eye tracking, interaction with the story, and start collecting data on that. That's the project that we want you to work on, Nathaniel, if we hire you. I just got to get our data science guy to give them a job. And then data collected from clinicians. So we've actually also figured out what questions do parents not actually answer very well, and if the physician overrides that answer, how does that interact with the decision-making process? And so we go through a pretty complicated, but not super sophisticated, right? This is not a recurrent neural net. This is not deep learning. We use good old-fashioned machine learning. Give me a bunch of data and let me figure out what's the best way to look at it. We are setting up a neural net to actually start looking at the videos. So we have about 30 terabytes of highly curated videos, and we're looking at setting up a neural net to start understanding and learning how to actually manually, or have the computer score those videos rather than having a human being who's trained to look for features score those videos. So essentially the way that we would do this is we take the physician questionnaire, we run it through 200 decision trees, and we decide, can I make a determination on this patient or not? If I can make a determination, we run through another 200 decision trees on that module, and then we decide autism positive, autism negative, or obviously if they can't make a determination, it's indeterminate. Then we add an additional module, which is the video, an additional module, which is the patient questionnaire, or physician questionnaire, and maybe that interactive story time. We start summating these into complex decision trees to try and determine what that is. So when you make a classifier, this is really cool. So initially, we were kind of thinking about it, well, you should be positive or negative for autism, right? But like any test, there will be false positives and false negatives. So in your red area where I think you do not have autism, there will be some green dots that actually have autism. They just don't look autistic to the classifier. And in the green area where we say you have autism, there will be some red dots of patients that don't have autism. So that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about that without overfitting is to actually make a band that says, you know what, we're not going to try. These are patients that the computer is just not good enough right now to figure out. These are complicated patients. Maybe they have comorbidities like autism plus ADHD. Maybe they have something else that looks like autism, right? So there are a subset of kids that actually look like they have ADHD, but we actually figure out that they have bipolar disorder or they have something else, right? So what's going on? Maybe they're, who knows, right? So what we do is we actually go and we made an inconclusive, indeterminate bucket, and then this allows us to boost our sensitivity and specificity to the point that as we do clinical trials, every 9 months we're moving that ROC curve up and to the right to the point that in our most recent study with about 70% coverage, we were 90% sensitive. So everyone good with sensitivity and specificity, right? Okay, sometimes I have to explain it to doctors, they don't remember their math. Explain it? Okay, so sensitivity is like, I like fishing, and I gave the example of trout and something else, and I'm like, those don't swim together. Trout and bass, do they swim in the same lake? Or whatever? Okay, so you're going fishing, okay? So if I want to fish, I want to catch 90%. That's my sensitivity. Of all the patients in the pool that have autism, I can catch 90% of them. And when I catch all the fish and I look at them, 83% of the fish that I caught actually had autism. There were a few that didn't have autism. So I caught all the 90% of the fish, and when I look at those fish, 83% had autism. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's pretty good. The interesting thing is that we can actually, and when we went and talked to the FDA, they kind of really like this. So if you think about like a pregnancy test that you're going into surgery or going to get a radiological examination, right? You want that sensitivity like 99%. So even if it gives me a false positive, that's better than taking a pregnant woman and doing a surgery on her, right? So we can tune this algorithm anywhere along the curve. We do not have to pick the mathematical maximum or the mathematical best point. We can pick what is the clinical best point. The other thing too is that we can tune this. So if I increase the inconclusive rate, so if I drop my coverage and say, you know what, I don't need to figure out 70% of the kids. If I can figure out 60%, but I can do that really, really good, maybe that's enough to be where we need to be. So our IP strategy and our FDA strategy align so that hopefully by the end of 2018, we will be the first autism diagnostic device that is cleared by the FDA. Currently, we are determined as a software as a medical device from the FDA, and we can begin, as soon as we have our quality systems up, start using this in clinical practice. We're gearing up right now to do about 5,000 patients in a clinical trial in a primary care setting. So let me tell you some other cool stuff. So there are actually data network effects among comorbidities of disease. And so what we figured out is we can actually decrease the development time and the training needs for other AI classifiers. So the concordance rate of the patients that we were trying to classify with autism, we actually picked up about 50+% of the features that are shared with an ADHD diagnosis. And as we start thinking about other disorders like oppositional defiant disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, or this host of other DSM-5 behavioral health diagnoses, there are these network effects between them. So these comorbidities, right, patients don't usually have one thing in this thing. So if you think about autism, there's an adage that if you've seen one patient with autism, you've seen one patient with autism, because it's very heterogeneous and there's a very large spectrum of what that disease looks like. And it's because there are these overlapping features. And so what we can do is we can actually, I don't know why I did that, but we can basically look at the patients in decision trees and evaluate them in a very highly specific dimension. And so if we do this over and over and over and over again, and then we take these patients and we display them sort of or project them into a highly dimensional space, and then flip them back down, rather than just saying you have autism, we can start to possibly classify the kids into like a type 1 autism, and a type 2 autism, and a type 2 ADHD, and a type 1 ADHD, and a type 3 ADHD, and then we can start looking at, now that we know how they present and what the phenotype is, and if we phenotype is how you clinically present, genotype is what your genetics are. If I start marrying that data, and I start looking at therapeutics, I can start saying, oh, look at treatment A, I can use for this cohort, treatment B works for this cohort, and so now we're starting to get into what we call precision medicine. So the concept of digital precision medicine is basically digital diagnostics plus digital therapeutics. Your diagnostic serves up what the therapeutic should be. And so what we've started doing is we've started with an autism classifier as a diagnostic. We're working into these comorbidities that we talked about. We're starting to serve up therapeutics. And so Pear Therapeutics was a company that basically used behavioral techniques to motivate patients who were substance abusers, non-opioid substance abusers, to not go back and abuse that substance that they were addicted to. And they found that their app, right, their digital intervention was so engaging, just like you get addicted to Candy Crush, and just like you get addicted to Panda Pop or whatever the game is, right? You can engage people on their cell phone, right? They're all addicted, right? You can engage them on their cell phone and you can change their behavior for a positive way. And that was better than seeing a therapist, right? That would actually beat the therapist. The more they were engaged with the device, the less likely they were to go back and abuse the drug. And so that's a huge win, right? Think about the manpowers and the amount of energy it takes to try and do those therapeutics. And so what we're doing is we've developed about 150 expert curated behavioral interventions, speech interventions, motor interventions to help these kids. And what we want to do is start demonstrating efficacy, that the more they engage with that therapeutic that we've developed, the better their outcome is. And then what we can do is we can get really smart and say, patient 1 needs this and this and this, patient 2 needs this and this and this. So what does success look like? It looks like Ava. So this is a patient very early on in the company who was told, don't worry about your child, but parents knew something was wrong. And unfortunately, sometimes as doctors, we don't listen to patients. That's not a dig on my profession, but it's just the reality of the world, right? And so for every 1,000 Cognoa patients that we see, 300 will have concerns and about 30 will come back positive for autism. But if we can catch them early, we can help them just like we helped Ava. So we got her an early diagnosis, we got her an early interventions, and she is doing much, much better than she would have if we did not do those interventions. Yes, I'm open for questions.
Was Ava your client or your patient, or was her parents?
They're both our patients, but technically the child's the patient. But I mean, we do in pediatrics. Anybody that comes with a patient is the patient, right? Because you treat the whole family, you really do. And the question was, who's your patient, Ava or the parents? I'm supposed to repeat the questions they told me. Yes, my friend in the back. Wait, I was told how many, the first person is supposed to be the IEEE sponsor.
Yeah, that was me. But
oh, you didn't ask your question. How many people are IEEE members? Raise your hands.
4, 5, 6,
6, 7, 8, 9,
Thanks.
11, 12. We got 12, 13, something like that?
15.
15? Yeah, like 25? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to bid on that. Years ago, in the Diagnostic program for mice used by short, it seems that if you're looking for decision trees, that would be a viable way of doing that. Have you given any thought to that?
I heard only parts of it. So short-lived, decision trees, and viable options is what I got.
Let me talk up. I can't usually marry you. Let me talk up.
I'm not going to repeat that for the camera.
Oh, okay. Stay away from that if I were you. Anyhow, about 1970, short-lived developed an expert rule system called myosin.
Yes, yes.
Are you familiar?
Yes, so it was an antibiotic selection.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And it was very productive, although physicians didn't use it. These physicians. Anyhow, he basically, an expert rule system basically is a decision tree with fuzzy logic. Is there any thought given to using that, or are you just going to a neural network or some other technology?
So I am actually a strong believer of doing both, right? I don't think not every nail needs a hammer. I'm really bad with those kind of sayings. But yeah, so not every problem needs machine learning to fix it, right? Sometimes rule-based things work really, really well. For complex systems, I think having something run through a machine learning for complex problems, especially things like computer vision, throwing a neural net at it to try and understand it better. I think those things have a definite role, but that again, in medicine, it's not just one or the other, and actually in life, it doesn't have to be this or that, right? You can combine things, and I know that there's an opportunity to combine the AI with rules-based, right? So you can write an AI, and then you can say, okay, on top of the AI, if you have this, this, and this, do this, etc. Does that make sense? Was that generic enough?
It was generic.
Okay, in real world, so for example, we have been looking at not only do so the AI is our machine learning decision trees are built strictly on AI. There is no rules-based part of it. However, the serving up of the therapeutics is expert rule-based to some extent. So we're a combination product. And and we're Turk in a box too, right? Because the videos are scored by analysts, but we're doing that to prepare, and we have almost 30 terabytes of highly curated samples of videos, probably one of the largest that I would know of a disease state that's been identified, curated, what features are in that video set to look for.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
So my question is, we know that there is a big problem with the cost structure for traditional pharmaceutical development. Some people blame the FDA, some people say it's because the life cycle production is too long, some people blame the middleman, whatever. How do we prevent the AI-assisted medicine to get to that point? The future I don't want to see is rich people can afford to be treated, to be diagnosed with a more precise AI model, whereas the poor people got stuck with a model that's poorly trained, issued by a less funded company. So what can we do in terms of policy, or what can we do for the company, like Google, your company, to go to their competition?
Well, I think that technology can be a great equalizer, right? And as technology costs go down, right? So, we talk about Moore's Law a lot. As technology costs come down, and as we build tools that allow for, maybe you don't have to have a really strong data science background, right? If you have a really good, so what's the company by Jeremy Howard? What's the name of that? Fast AI. So if you think about like Fast AI, for example, right? His goal is you don't need to have a computer science degree to start learning how to do some of this stuff, right? Can you take artificial intelligence to the masses? And so my thought is I don't see in the future that wealth or status will give you a better AI system access necessarily. I think actually it'll be the opposite. I think it will allow for, especially in third world countries, where maybe they don't have access to the same level of specialists to sort of equalize the playing field. So there may be some of that exists to some extent, but I think it'll probably be, there'll be more good than harm that comes out of it.
See, I'm not optimistic about the cost going down because of the technology, because you see, for example, ultrasound is a very old technology. The price doesn't go, the cost for the patient doesn't go down as the time goes by.
I think that's only unique to the United States because of the way that our healthcare system is structured. So that's not a technology issue. That is a, yeah.
Like low company prevent us from going down that route.
So I will tell you that our thought process is do not pass costs to the consumer and do not pass costs to the physician. Figure out a way to work within the health insurance and demonstrate that the product provides actually reduction in cost. So part of that 5,000 patients that I talked to you about that we're doing the clinical trial, we've established a rapport with CalOptima, which is CHOC Health Alliance, to actually look at the claims data of those children, to look at what is the cost, what is the cost value, or what is the value proposition that we're putting forth so that we can price it and figure out what the cost to the insurer should be. But yeah, in the United States, the problem is that we have, and this is, I said I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to, right? We have basically buckets of money that you put your money into, and that's your insurance company. And the reason that the healthcare is partially very expensive in the United States is there's lots of little buckets. If you pool those buckets into one big bucket and everybody pays into it and everyone's required to pay into it, then we figure out some better potential cost savings, right? And you can negotiate that this drug shouldn't cost $3 million just because it only cures 5 people or 10 people, right? You can start bargaining down types of things. Now, it's not a fix-all, and I'm not necessarily saying that universal healthcare is a panacea and there's no problems and there's not access issues and other issues, but from a healthcare cost perspective, it can bring the cost down. I don't know if I have an answer to your question fully, and it is, remember that slide with the super complicated? It looks something like that, and I don't pretend to understand all of that. I don't know, sorry, that's a really hard question, and it's not technical. My job is this. And this is a good philosophy. I think, as a company, as a human being, do what's right. If you do what's right, you'll always win, right? And it's not necessarily, and I think you'll win financially too, but you just do what's right for the patient. You do what's right for society, and you'll be all right. Right? You won't end up like the guy that, was it the one that, Schrilling or whatever, that ended up in jail? Yeah, Pharma Boy. Do what's right, right? That's a good philosophy if you just do what's right. And that's actually one of the reasons that the institutions and the organizations that I'm a part of, the philosophy is do what's right. And if they don't have that, if there's not an alignment there, then I'm not going to be part of that organization.
I think we had a question in the back.
Yes. Is it an easy question or one of those hard questions that get into philosophy and ethics and we'll see.
You mentioned that we have a lot of silos, that data integration is a challenge. What are some of the initiatives? And what is your recommendation? I think it's a good way of tackling this problem.
I think the best thing to actually do, and I'm a strong believer of this, is to decentralize it. And I think that the blockchain actually has a lot of potential to liberate healthcare information. So one of remember the breast cancer project that I was telling you about? So John Shepard out of UCSF, what he's actually trying to do is look at how can you implement blockchain in that scenario where I can basically give my medical records, I can can anonymize it. I get a token for it, right? The token pays me back. If I'm a researcher and I want access to that information, I can pay for it with that token, right? That has a monetary value, right? I think people in general, if you actually talk to people, if you have a brain tumor, you don't care about privacy. Do you really care about your privacy at that point? You're like, no, you need to help me. I want to share my data, right? And if we can figure out ways to share data that maybe in an anonymized way, but there's a way that you control it still, who's accessing it, whether or not they can recognize who you are, whatever it is, you know, and you know what, people may be willing to give up their privacy for better healthcare, right? That may be a real exchange. So to me, if you rely on government, I don't see it happening. If you rely on institutions, guess what? Right, if you have data, data is actually power, right? Data is wealth, data is value. So if I control data, right, and if I'm a healthcare system, guess what? I want to control my data. If I'm a Kaiser, I don't want to share with CHOC, right? If I'm CHOC, I don't want to share with St. Joe's, right? Why? Because if I own those patients, if I own their data, quote unquote, right, that gives me a power, it gives me a control, right? And I'm not digging on my institution, but I'm trying to help you understand that actually you own your healthcare data. You have a right to your healthcare data. There's an initiative that you should own your healthcare data. But guess what? If you go into any institution and you ask for your healthcare data, they're going to give you copies on paper, right, printed from the EMR, which is ridiculous, right? And guess what? I was on the board of directors for our regional health information exchange, but that is also a confused process, right? So matching a CBC, so that's your white blood cells, for example, to the white blood cells in another institution, right? You talk about standards, they suck in medicine, right? So we have HL7 standards, but we only have these loin codes for a certain number of things, right? So if I have a specialty test done in my institution and I want to share it to another institution, it's actually really hard to map that. So we've done some population health things where we're trying to pull data from your pharmacy, from your lab, from other institutions, and the mapping to do that is really, really labor intensive. So to me, if we can liberate it, if we can put it on blockchain, I think that helps liberate the data. That's my radical idea for the day. Ben, right? Am I reading? I can read, only if you sit up front you can get your name right. Okay, Ben.
I have a technical question, and if you are not, I'll answer a backup question.
Yes, I am an MD. Go ahead.
So my question is about how do you determine the features for your decision trees, right? Are the features directly drawn from, let's say, the videos, or is there like an intermediate step where it gets sort of consolidated into medical terminologies and then gets inputted into a decision tree?
So the way that, so two things. If you want to get an FDA approved product, you cannot validate on your training data. Your training data must be separate from your validation data. And that's just probably a good rule in general. The second thing is that, so the way that we did it at Cognoa was we took basically those line items from those 20,000 kids, looked at what are the features that are most predictive, and then scaled those down. And then in our validation studies, every time we did a validation study, excuse me, we also identify other features that we could test. So we can do an A/B testing. I didn't show it, but all of our trials have been kind of like crossover with this algorithm, and then on top of it tested the second algorithm. So we have our primary algorithm, and then we're looking at validating the newest algorithm on top of it, and then we can kind of stack them up. So it's not really a conversion of medical terminology. If you think about it, so like one of the features of autism is poor eye contact or poor socialization, right? I don't need to convert that into a medical term, right? I can just ask a parent, describe the level of eye contact of your child, and what we do is we give them basically a Likert scale, like, you know, 0 is my kid doesn't look at me at all, 5, my kid looks great, and they sustain eye contact, and then somewhere in between. And so we can look at those features. Just so you know too, a lot of the questionnaires that we use in medicine, like for example, there's something called an MCHAT. MCHAT is a screener for autism. It's yes or no questions. It's only binary, right? So we can, but you know, if you gave me 20 questions with 5 answer choices and I have to manually score that, and it takes me 15 minutes to do that, you know, and it's just add them up, it's really not that helpful, right? So there, again, this is an opportunity to use technology in a more sophisticated way, and then actually start measuring right? If you answer question 1 this way and question 5 this way and question 3 this way, and how do those 3 answers relate to each other, and how is that predictive, right? Versus if you answered them in a different way, right? And that's not something that you can do manually scoring. I mean, you could. It's just going to take you, 20 years to do it or something like that.
I think we should.
One more, and then okay. He's the sponsor. He can ask 3 questions.
That's what I was thinking.
She told me that it's 11 o'clock we're staying, right? Because that's when they end validating. I'm just joking.
So how much, so you're developing the product.
Yes.
Is custom software, or how much is cloud-based, open source? In other words, are the tools good enough that you can use them from third parties, or are you having to do it all internally?
So everything that we've built has been internal. Our neural net that we're looking to use on the videos, we've been thinking about something like TensorFlow and some of those other products to test it. I think if we get an AUC of like a 0.75 or something, that would be really cool, and then we can tweak it. If you give me an AUC of like 0.3, I'd probably go, it's not gonna help me, right? So I think some of the off-the-shelf stuff, I don't know the answer to that yet, because my area under the curve. So that's how, remember those curves, like how, sorry, I'm explaining for the group, right, if you're not familiar with AUCs. So if I put it into the classifier and that curve comes back, and I measure the area underneath and it looks really, really good, right, then I go, okay, I can use that off-the-shelf thing. Everything that we're doing is in an S3 Amazon HIPAA secure cloud, and Amazon thought that was really cool, and they actually featured Cognoa in one of their showcase things, I don't know, a couple months ago. So yeah, but cloud makes sense. If you can use off the shelf, I think it's worth a shot, but you're gonna have to tweak it for sure. Okay, thank you everyone.
Let's thank Dr. Taraman for a very good talk.
Thank you, Dan.
I have something for you. And we have a certificate of appreciation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.